Hi people, it's Archivist here, and today I'm going to be doing a campaign-only review for Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019. And to keep spoilers to an absolute minimum, I'm going to be showing a campaign mission that's quite early in the game, and I chose this one specifically because at a glance, you're not going to really be able to tell what's going on. We're just in a Middle Eastern setting, shooting some bad guys, you won't be able to glean too much more than that. So to give a general premise to the game, you're playing as 3 different characters from 3 different perspectives of warfare. There's someone from the CIA, one guy's from anti-terrorist operations, and the final is a freedom fighter. And I think really the story tends to revolve around her the most more than anyone else. I certainly found her story to be the most interesting. And there are some interesting things. One that comes up quite a lot is how far you'll go in warfare in order to achieve your objectives, and not just from the perspective of the enemy, but sometimes finding yourself in those very situations yourself. And I think that's probably where some of the early controversy came up about this game, because I don't want to talk too specific about what those things are, but there are points in the game where you might feel a little bit uncomfortable in what you're doing. But there are 2 ways of looking at that, right? I think it's quite effective that a game from the Call of Duty series can make me feel a little bit uncomfortable, because it adds to the overall sense of immersion. For me, the fact the game can make me feel like that is a total positive, a really good thing. You know, it never made me feel sick to my stomach, but it made me question what I was doing in a virtual setting, which I find to be very effective. I've noticed that some people seem to actually be offended and consider it a negative, and I think that's really disingenuous to what the game's trying to do, because it's not just throwing these out to just offend you and be gratuitous. I think it's doing it in a way that it's making you realise that warfare isn't black and white. There isn't just the good guys and the bad guys. There's a little bit of an argument on both sides. And sometimes your enemy will use what is a sickening tactic, but then in order to beat them, you have to employ something very similar. And again, there's 2 ways you look at that. Either it's in a really effective way of telling a story from different sides, or it's a way of being unnecessarily provocative, but I see it as being an effective storytelling mechanism myself. And also I've heard, there was a lot of hype before the game came out a long time ago, when some journalists got some early viewings of the game for some of the more hardcore missions, and I can totally imagine which missions they're talking about, which are some of the most effective missions in the game. But they're nowhere close to something like No Russian, you know. Like, that was a mission where you were with a bunch of terrorists mowing down waves and waves of civilians with no real reason other than to create havoc. Where there are controversial moments in this game, it's only there in service of making a difficult situation harder, but you're just trying to do your job. And I think Price feels like the linchpin of most of those decisions. It's almost like they wanted to use him to deliver that message. One of the first things you see him do in the game when he first arrives in quite an epic style is, again, I don't want to ruin it, but there's a situation happening and there's a sort of no way out scenario where something bad has to happen, and he basically chooses the lesser of 2 evils. And I thought that was a good way of introducing him, because it makes him a kind of guy he's not necessarily, you know, the hero from a traditional story where he can just make everything right. He'll just choose the most effective way of causing the least collateral, and I thought that was a really effective choice with him. I also really like the actor who plays Price, right? I might be on my own on this, but I think I like him a bit more than the last guy. Although the old Captain Price is super iconic, I feel like this guy's a little bit more human, a little bit more emotive, and I really enjoy him. They could have called him something completely different and just made him a new character, and I think I would have enjoyed it just as much. They're using that name to give him that, that bit of iconography, but he's a good character in of himself. He's just doing the hard thing. It's in the trailer, and it's a little bit cheesy, but it is true in that when he says, we get dirty and the world stays clean. That is such a theme in this, and I really like it. It's a really brave, ballsy thing for them to do in the story. I will say, though, because of the game's length, the campaign isn't overly long. No shorter than past Call of Duty titles. That's always been a bit of a weakness. But the thing is, there are some character interactions and things that I could tell were going to quite an interesting place, but just because the game's a bit too short, they weren't explored as much as I would have liked. but that's nitpicking a little bit. In terms of gameplay, something I noticed is that they keep you moving quite slowly in this game. You actually move much slower than you do in the multiplayer by default, and I think it's because it's trying to encourage you to really not be a mad run and gunner in this. It's not about flanking people by just sprinting past them and shooting them aside. You really want to progress forward on a natural front line. And there are some great bits where there'll be like a machine gun pinning you down and you have to use smoke in order to move up. And I also like the fact that whereas in past Call of Duty titles, every time a machine gunner would come up, it would say, throw smoke. But in this, it will tell you to do it the first time, but after that, you've sort of got to use your best judgment and know exactly where to throw it and when. So it will give you that initial hint, but after that, you're sort of on your own to work out what to do. In terms of my platform of choice, I decided to go with the PlayStation 4 Pro. This really came down to the wire. I really wasn't sure what platform to get it on. I was debating it all over the beta. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. But the reason I went with PS4 Pro was because I had this hunch, this really, kind of instinctual thing where I thought that despite what they have said, I am almost certain that they have treated PlayStation as the lead platform just because they know that's where the most people are going to be playing it, because PlayStation has just such a high install base now. And I thought it would probably be the most stable experience as a result. I have no proof for that because I haven't tried the other versions, but I will say this, the PS4 Pro version, absolutely wonderful. Although the multiplayer beta for this was a little bit blurry, they've obviously done something to make it look much nicer now in the campaign for single player in the release. It looks super sharp. The frame rate is very, very solid. Only a few little drops here and then, but the drops are sort of smoothed out so they don't, ruin the pace of gameplay. And the lighting, the new engine, the graphics, the feel, the sounds, it's just all so brilliant. I am so glad. It's one of the most exciting things about this game is that they went to a new engine. And I was thinking, had they done it too early? Should they have waited for the PlayStation 5 and Scarlet? But no, it seems that the enhanced console has the ability to make this game look absolutely stellar. If there is probably one weakness of this engine I noticed in the campaign, is that if you're particularly eagle-eyed, you might see certain details being cold as you get up to them. That's a very normal thing with LOD, but there were a few spots with things like rubble where I could notice details popping in despite being very close to them. So that's the only weakness I would say of this engine, is that it seems that LOD can be very aggressive. But in terms of the overall presentation, especially at night time with lights and things like HDR going on, it is a wonderful, wonderful game to behold. For my closing comments, would I recommend getting Call of Duty Modern Warfare just for the campaign? I suppose the one thing that makes that a tricky thing is that it's not particularly long. I think I did it in about 5 hours, and look, it's a quality campaign, absolutely no question about that. It's a real thrill ride. It's a fantastic, grounded experience, but it's quite a lot of money to just get for the campaign, unless you're the kind of person who likes to replay on harder difficulties. If you're that kind of person, then it might be enough. But if you're someone who wants to play it for the campaign, and you also expect to maybe dabble with Spec Ops and the multiplayer, then yes, in that case, it definitely becomes worth it if you're also seeing those other modes as supplementary. So, as always, people, thanks very much for watching and see you next time.